The child within us always believed that heroes exist only on movie screens. But what if I told you that, on that seemingly ordinary afternoon in Seattle, a group of teenagers was about to discover that some helpless old men carry secrets that could freeze the blood in anyone's veins? Picture the scene. 5 arrogant young men surrounding a 68-year-old gentleman in a dark alley, laughing at his apparent frailty, pushing him, testing his limits. They didn't know, couldn't know, that they were provoking a ghost. A man whose past was buried beneath decades of classified operations, missions that would never see the light of day, and skills that should have remained forever dormant. In less than 15 seconds, the helpless old man transformed that alley into a brutal classroom. No weapons, no backup, just muscles that remembered movements trained in secret camps across England, reflexes sharpened in forgotten war zones, and a gaze that had seen things these boys couldn't imagine in their worst nightmares. But how did a lethal former MI6 agent end up living anonymously in Seattle? What was he hiding? And why, even after years of forced peace, did his survival instinct awaken with such ferocity? This is not a story of gratuitous revenge. It's a narrative about identity, about the ghosts we carry, about the thin line between civilization and survival instinct. It's about a man who desperately tried to bury who he was, only to discover that some training never leaves us. What really happened in that alley? How did 5 teenagers emerge from there completely transformed? And what secret was this veteran protecting that was worth more than his own peace of mind? The rain fell softly over Ballard, one of Seattle's most historic neighborhoods, where brick buildings from the early 1900s still stood proudly against the gray Pacific Northwest sky. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with sea salt from Puget Sound created an atmosphere that Thomas Whitmore had grown to love over 25 years of deliberate anonymity. Thomas walked slowly along Ballard Avenue, his gray wool coat protecting him from the October drizzle. At 68, he appeared to be just another retired man enjoying his golden years in this quiet corner of the city. His thinning silver hair, reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck, and the slight limp in his left leg painted the perfect picture of harmless old age. But appearances, as Thomas knew better than most, were the most effective weapon in any arsenal. He stopped at his usual spot, the Nordic Book Haven, a small independent bookstore squeezed between a vintage clothing shop and a craft brewery. Margaret, the 72-year-old owner, greeted him with her customary warm smile. "The usual section, Thomas?" "Please, Margaret, though I suspect you've already set aside something for me." She chuckled, producing a worn copy of a John le Carré novel from beneath the counter. "Thought you might appreciate this. Found it at an estate sale." Thomas's hand hesitated for just a fraction of a second before taking the book. Le Carré, the man who understood the real world of espionage better than most who lived it. Thomas had met him once, briefly, in Berlin in 1987. Neither man had acknowledged what they both knew the other understood. "Thank you, Margaret. You know my tastes too well." The bookstore was Thomas's routine, as were his morning walks to Kerry Park, his Tuesday chess games at the community center with Harold Chen, and his Friday evening dinners at the Walrus and the Carpenter. Routine created predictability. Predictability created safety. Safety was an illusion Thomas had carefully constructed, brick by brick, year by year. But on this particular Thursday afternoon, as Thomas cut through the alley behind the bookstore, a shortcut he'd taken hundreds of times, his illusion was about to shatter. They emerged from the shadows like wolves who'd spotted injured prey. 5 teenagers, ranging from 16 to 19 years old, wearing a combination of designer streetwear and practiced intimidation. The leader, a tall young man with sharp features and cold eyes, stepped forward first. "Well, what do we have here?" Marcus Johnson's voice carried the false confidence of youth who'd never truly been tested. "Old man taking shortcuts through our territory?" Thomas stopped, his posture remaining relaxed, his breathing steady. He recognized the dynamics immediately. Marcus was the alpha, desperate to prove himself. The boy to his left, shorter with nervous energy, was Devon Carter, the enforcer looking for approval. The 3 others, Jake Martinez, Tyler Brooks, and Ethan Williams, were followers, dangerous primarily in groups. "Gentlemen, I'm just passing through," No trouble intended. Trouble. Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of genuine humor. Did you hear that? Grandpa here doesn't want trouble. He moved closer, invading Thomas's personal space. Maybe Grandpa should pay a toll for using our alley. Thomas's eyes, pale blue and seemingly tired, flickered for just a moment. In that instant, he calculated 17 different outcomes, assessed 6 potential threats, and identified 3 exit strategies. His body, despite 25 years of deliberate softness, remembered every hour of training from Sandhurst, every brutal lesson learned in the field. But Thomas Whitmore, the ghost, remained perfectly still. "I don't have much money with me, son. Perhaps we can—" Devon pushed him, not hard, but enough to test boundaries. "Perhaps we can what, old man? You gonna cry? You gonna run?" The other 3 circled around, completing the predator formation. This was their game, their ritual of dominance played out in alleys across the city. They'd never seriously hurt anyone, but the intimidation was real, the power dynamic clear. Marcus reached out to grab Thomas's collar, a mistake he would replay in his mind for years to come. What happened next occurred in the space between heartbeats. Thomas's left hand moved with surgical precision, redirecting Marcus's grab, his thumb finding the pressure point on the young man's wrist with perfect accuracy. Simultaneously, his right hand, which had seemed frail and shaking, shot forward in a palm strike that stopped 1 centimeter from Marcus's throat, close enough for the teenager to feel the displaced air, to understand that Thomas had chosen mercy. Marcus froze, his body understanding what his mind hadn't yet processed. He was completely at this old man's mercy. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds. "I believe," Thomas said quietly, his voice unchanged but carrying an edge that could cut steel, "that you've made a miscalculation, young man." Devon lunged forward to help his friend, and Thomas simply shifted his weight, his foot sweeping out in a low arc that sent the teenager sprawling to the wet pavement. Again, controlled. Again, measured. Again, terrifying in its effortless precision. Thomas released Marcus and stepped back, his breathing still steady, his posture once again that of a harmless elderly man. But something had changed in the air of that alley. Something primal and ancient. The 5 teenagers stared at him as if seeing a ghost. "Go home," Thomas said softly. "Study hard, respect your elders, and perhaps choose your targets more carefully in the future." He turned to walk away, and for a moment, the teenagers were too stunned to move. Then Marcus found his voice, though it cracked with something that might have been fear. Who the hell are you?" Thomas paused at the alley's entrance, the grey Seattle light silhouetting his figure. For just a moment the weight of decades pressed down on him, all the missions, all the identities, all the lives taken in the name of Queen and country, all the ghosts that haunted his dreams. Just an old man trying to buy books in peace, son, just an old man. But as he disappeared into the Seattle drizzle, the 5 teenagers remained frozen in that alley, their world fundamentally altered. Because sometimes the most dangerous people are those who look the least threatening. Sometimes the greatest warriors are those who choose not to fight. And sometimes an old man buying books carries shadows darker than anything found in fiction. Marcus looked down at his wrist, already bruising from where Thomas had controlled him with minimal effort. His hand was still shaking, but not from cold. "What the hell just happened?" Jake whispered, helping Devon to his feet. But none of them had an answer. Not yet. They didn't know they'd just encountered Thomas Whitmore, service number classified, MI6 operative for 23 years, veteran of operations in Berlin, Moscow, Belfast, and a dozen other cities where secrets were currency and lives were expendable. They didn't know that the man they'd tried to intimidate had killed his first target at age 26 in a safe house in Prague. They didn't know that he'd disappeared from service in 1998 after an operation went catastrophically wrong, taking his identity with him into the shadows of the Pacific Northwest. All they knew was that their understanding of reality had just been violently recalibrated in 15 seconds of controlled terror. In his small apartment overlooking Shilshole Bay, Thomas locked the door behind him and allowed himself to exhale properly for the first time since the encounter. His hands were steady as he set down the Le Carré novel, but inside his heart was racing. He walked to the window, looking out at the grey waters of Puget Sound. Somewhere beneath his floorboards, sealed in waterproof containers, were documents that 3 governments would kill to possess. Evidence of operations that officially never happened, names of agents who officially never existed, and the real reason Thomas Whitmore had to disappear. He'd kept the peace for 25 years. He'd been the ghost, the shadow, the forgotten man. But ghosts, as Thomas knew all too well, had a way of returning when you least expected them. And those 5 teenagers had just seen something they shouldn't have. A glimpse behind the carefully constructed mask. Thomas poured himself 2 fingers of scotch and sat in his reading chair, the one positioned so he could see both the door and the window. Old habits died hard, or rather, they never died at all. His phone, a simple flip model that couldn't be traced, sat silent on the table beside him. It had been silent for years, but Thomas knew that silence wouldn't last. Actions had consequences, ripples spread, and somewhere, someone would start asking questions. The rain continued to fall over Seattle, washing the streets clean, hiding 1,000 stories in every drop. And in a dark alley in Ballard, 5 teenagers stood in the rain, trying to understand what they'd just experienced, trying to reconcile the harmless old man with the ghost who dismantled them without effort. Marcus touched his bruised wrist again and made a decision that would change all their lives. He had to know. He had to understand. He had to find out who Thomas Whitmore really was. If you want to know what happens when Marcus begins his dangerous investigation, when the past Thomas buried so carefully starts to resurface, when a Seattle detective discovers a file that should have been destroyed decades ago, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, comment your thoughts and share this story, because what's coming next will reveal secrets that were meant to stay buried forever, and a confrontation that will test whether Thomas Whitmore can remain a ghost or if he'll have to become what he once was one final time. Detective Emma Chen had been with Seattle PD for 11 years, specializing in youth gang prevention and community outreach. At 34, she'd earned a reputation for understanding the complexities of teenage crime, knowing when to intervene with force and when to intervene with compassion. Which is why she found herself intrigued when Devon Carter walked into her office at the North Precinct 3 days after the alley incident. His mother, Patricia Carter, gripping his shoulder with the fierce determination of a woman who refused to let her son become another statistic. "Tell Detective Chen what you told me," Patricia commanded, her voice carrying the weight of single mothers everywhere who fought daily battles against the streets. Devon sat in the chair across from Emma's desk, his tough exterior cracked just enough to show the confused teenager beneath. His hands fidgeted with the hem of his hoodie as he spoke. "There was this old man in the alley behind Ballard Avenue. We were messing with him, just intimidating him, nothing serious. But then—" Devon paused, struggling to find words for what he'd witnessed. "Detective, he moved like— I don't even know how to describe it. Like he wasn't even trying, but Marcus was on the ground, I was on my back, and he didn't even break a sweat." Emma leaned forward, her detective instincts activating. "Did he hurt any of you?" "That's the thing, he could have. I saw it in his eyes. He could have destroyed all 5 of us, but he just stopped, like he was in complete control the whole time." Devon's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Who is he, Detective? What kind of old man moves like that?" After taking Devon's statement and promising Patricia she'd look into it, Emma found herself driving to Ballard that evening. The address Devon had provided led her to a modest apartment building overlooking the bay, the kind of place where retired Boeing employees lived out their final years in comfortable anonymity. Thomas Whitmore, Unit 304. According to the landlord, he'd been a model tenant for 25 years, never late on rent, never causing problems, keeping to himself. Too perfect, Emma thought. In her experience, people who kept this perfect a profile were either genuinely boring or expertly hiding something. She ran his name through the system. Driver's license, clean. No criminal record. Social security number traced back to his birth in Lancashire, England in 1957. Naturalized U.S. citizen in 1999. Everything checked out. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. Emma had a gift for reading between the lines of official documentation, and Thomas Whitmore's file read, like someone who'd been created on paper, rather than lived through life's messy reality. There were no speeding tickets, no credit card debts, no divorces, no medical records beyond routine checkups. For a 68-year-old man, he was suspiciously absent from the digital footprint most people left behind. She decided to conduct surveillance, a decision that would lead her down a rabbit hole deeper than anything in her career. For 3 days, Emma watched Thomas Whitmore's routine. He followed the same pattern with almost mechanical precision. Morning walk to Kerry Park at exactly 6:15 a.m., bookstore visit every Thursday at 3 p.m., chess at the community centre on Tuesdays, dinner at the same restaurant every Friday. But it was the small things that caught her attention, the way his eyes constantly scanned his environment, how he always sat with his back to walls, how he walked in patterns that maximized his visual awareness of surroundings. These weren't the habits of a retired accountant or teacher. These were the behaviors of someone trained in surveillance awareness, someone who'd spent a lifetime watching for threats. On the 4th day of surveillance, Emma watched Thomas at his chess game with Harold Chen, a local architect. She positioned herself at a nearby table with a newspaper, close enough to overhear their conversation. "Your defense is improving, Harold," Thomas said, moving his bishop with careful precision. "You're thinking 3 moves ahead now instead of 2. Years of practice against you, my friend, though I suspect you're still thinking 6 moves ahead." Thomas smiled, a sad expression that flickered across his weathered features. Age catches up with all of us eventually. The mind slows, reflexes dull. "Is that why you neutralized 5 teenagers last week without breaking a sweat?" Harold's question was casual, but his eyes were sharp. Emma's attention sharpened. Harold knew. Thomas's hand paused over his knight. For 3 full seconds he remained perfectly still, and Emma recognized it as the stillness of a predator deciding how to respond to a potential threat. Then he moved the piece and sighed. "Word travels fast in Ballard. Small neighborhood. Devon's mother, Patricia, is friends with my wife. The boy was quite shaken." Harold leaned back in his chair. 20 years we've played chess, Thomas. 20 years, and I've wondered. Your perfect technique, the way you read moves before they happen, the precision in everything you do, the fact that you never ever speak about your past before Seattle." "Harold, I'm not asking you to tell me. Whatever you were, whoever you were, it's your business." Harold moved his rook, deliberately walking into Thomas's trap. "I'm just saying that sometimes the past doesn't stay buried, and when it surfaces, even the best chess players need allies." Thomas completed the checkmate in 2 moves, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. "Thank you, my friend. I'll remember that." Emma filed this conversation away, her curiosity now burning. She'd planned to confront Thomas that evening, but circumstances intervened in a way that would crack open the carefully constructed life of Thomas Whitmore. She was called to the precinct for an urgent matter. A routine background check for a federal security clearance had pinged something unusual. The system, which cross-referenced international databases, had flagged a file that made Emma's blood run cold. In a sealed archive folder, accessible only through a random system glitch that had momentarily lowered classification protocols, Emma glimpsed a document that shouldn't exist. Subject: Thomas Alexander Whitmore. Service number: Redacted Agency, MI6, Secret Intelligence Service. Status: Classified Operations, Berlin Station, 1983-1989, Moscow, 1989-1992, Belfast, 1992-1995, Middle East Theatre, 1995-1998. Clearance level: Cosmic Top Secret. Notes: Subject possesses critical intelligence regarding Operation Crimson Shadow. Mandatory protection protocols in effect. Under no circumstances should subject be approached without MI6 liaison authorization. The file disappeared from her screen in less than 10 seconds. But Emma had seen enough. She sat back in her chair, her heart racing. Thomas Whitmore wasn't just former intelligence. He was someone important enough that files about him were still actively classified 25 years after his disappearance from service. Meanwhile, across the city in a basement apartment in the University District, Marcus Johnson sat surrounded by 3 computer monitors, his fingers flying across keyboards as he dove deeper into an obsession that had consumed him since the alley encounter. Marcus wasn't just a street thug. He was a 19-year-old prodigy who dropped out of the University of Washington's computer science program because it was too slow, too restrictive. His intelligence had found an outlet in hacking, in digital exploration, in finding secrets hidden in the dark corners of the internet. And Thomas Whitmore had become his singular focus. He'd started with public records, finding the same suspiciously perfect profile Emma had discovered. But Marcus had resources and skills that went deeper. He accessed DMV photos from different years, running them through age progression software. He hacked into the UK's National Registry, tracing Thomas's supposed birthplace in Lancashire, and he found nothing. No birth records, no childhood schools, no paper trail before 1999. It's like he didn't exist before Seattle, Marcus muttered to himself, energy drink cans scattered around his workspace, or like someone created him. He tried facial recognition software, scanning old newspaper archives and historical photographs, and then, at 3 a.m. on a Thursday morning, he found something. A grainy photograph from a 1989 Berlin newspaper, a diplomatic reception. In the background, slightly out of focus, stood a man who looked remarkably like a younger Thomas Whitmore, though the caption identified him as Cultural Attaché William Harrison. Marcus's hands trembled as he saved the image. Cultural Attaché was often a cover for intelligence operatives. He dug deeper, finding 3 more photographs over a span of years, different names, different cities, but the same face, the same distinctive jawline, the same pale blue eyes, the same way of standing that suggested coiled awareness. Marcus had found the ghost's footprints across history, but finding footprints he was about to learn meant that others were now watching him leave his own. In London, in a nondescript office building near Vauxhall Cross that officially didn't exist, an alert pinged on a monitor. An AI system designed to flag unauthorized searches of specific archived materials had detected Marcus's digital intrusion. Senior Intelligence Officer Victoria Ashford, a woman whose career had been built on managing secrets, read the alert with growing concern. Someone was digging into Thomas Whitmore's past. Someone in Seattle. She picked up a secure phone and made a call that would set events in motion that no one could stop. "We have a situation. The Seattle asset has been compromised. Authorization requested for cleanup protocol." Back in Seattle, Thomas sat in his apartment, the Le Carré novel open but unread in his lap. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that the careful equilibrium he'd maintained for 25 years was tilting. His phone, the one he'd kept silent for so long, suddenly vibrated. A text message from a number that shouldn't exist appeared on the screen. "Ghost protocol activated. You have been compromised. Terminate all current associations extraction. Window, 48 hours, Shepherd." Thomas stared at the message for a long moment, then looked out at the Seattle skyline, at the city that had become his home, at the life he'd built from the ashes of his former existence. 25 years of peace, ending with a simple text message. He thought about Margaret at the bookstore, Harold at the chessboard, the small routines that had given his life meaning after so much darkness. And he thought about 5 teenagers who'd made a mistake in an alley, who'd glimpsed something they shouldn't have, who were now in danger they couldn't possibly understand. Because when you open a door to the past, sometimes monsters walk through, and sometimes those monsters are hunting the people you've accidentally exposed. Thomas made a decision that would define everything that followed. He deleted the message and powered down the phone. He wasn't running. Not this time. Not again. If his past was coming for him, he would face it. But he would face it his way, protecting the life he'd built, protecting the people who'd become his community, even protecting those 5 foolish teenagers who'd started this entire cascade. The ghost was about to become real again, but on his own terms. What's your opinion on Thomas's decision? Should he have run, or is he right to stand and fight? Because what's coming next involves secrets that governments killed to protect, a detective who's in over her head, and a teenager whose curiosity is about to make him a target. The convergence is coming, and when these paths collide, Seattle will become a battlefield for a war that officially never happened. To understand what Thomas Whitmore was truly protecting, we must journey back 37 years to a cold November night in Berlin, when the wall still divided the city and the Cold War was a living, breathing reality that claimed lives in the shadows. Thomas Whitmore was 30 years old, a rising star in MI6's Directorate of Operations with 5 successful missions already completed. His specialty was deep cover intelligence gathering. He could disappear into a city, build a life, extract information and vanish without a trace. Berlin Station had become his home base, operating under the cover of a British Council cultural liaison. His apartment was in Kreuzberg, close enough to the wall to hear the guard dogs barking at night, to feel the division between worlds in his bones. His mission was to cultivate a source inside the Soviet Military Intelligence Directorate, a colonel named Yevgeny Volkov, who had access to troop deployment plans and nuclear readiness protocols. It was delicate work, requiring months of careful social engineering, building trust with a man who'd been trained to trust no one. The breakthrough came at a classical music concert at the Philharmonie. Thomas, playing his role as a culture-loving diplomat, struck up a conversation with Volkov about Shostakovich's hidden meanings in Symphony No. 5, how the composer had embedded criticism of Stalin in seemingly patriotic music. "You understand subtext, Mr. Harrison," Volkov had said, using Thomas's cover name. "Most Westerners only see surface." Over 6 months, Thomas cultivated the relationship. Dinners in carefully chosen restaurants, discussions of music, literature, philosophy, never pushing, never forcing, just building the foundation of trust that intelligence work required. The turning point came when Volkov confided that his daughter needed medical treatment for a rare illness, treatment unavailable in Moscow, but routine in London. Thomas arranged it, using MI6 resources to bring the girl to Britain under humanitarian cover. In exchange, Volkov began sharing information that reshaped NATO's understanding of Soviet military capabilities. But intelligence work is never clean. Every asset is a human being with complications, with families, with motivations that shift like sand. One frozen February morning in 1989, Thomas met Volkov at their usual dead-drop location, a bench in Tiergarten Park. But something was wrong. Volkov's hands shook, his eyes darted constantly, and his breath came in short, panicked gasps. "They know," Volkov whispered in Russian. "They've always known. I've been feeding you information they wanted you to have. The whole operation has been a Soviet play, and we walked right into it." Thomas's world tilted. Months of intelligence, assessments that had shaped policy decisions, deployments that had been made based on Volkov's information, all compromised. "There's something else," Volkov continued, his voice dropping even lower. "There's a mole in MI6, someone high level. That's how they knew about me from the beginning. Someone in London has been feeding Moscow everything." Before Thomas could respond, the world exploded in violence. Soviet agents emerged from vehicles, weapons drawn. Volkov pulled a small pistol from his coat, firing 3 shots that gave Thomas crucial seconds to move. What happened next was a blur of training overriding thought. Thomas moved through the park like a ghost, using terrain, using crowds, using every trick he'd learned at Fort Monkton. 2 Soviet agents pursued him through the streets of Berlin, and Thomas led them on a chase that ended in a construction site near Potsdamer Platz. When the dust settled, one agent was unconscious, the other had fled, and Thomas had escaped across the border into West Berlin. But Volkov was dead, shot trying to reach the West Berlin crossing point, his body left in the no-man's land between walls as a message to other would-be defectors. Thomas returned to London, debriefed by senior officers, his report creating shockwaves through MI6 headquarters. A mole hunt began, quiet but intense, tearing through the service looking for the traitor who'd compromised operations across Europe. For 3 years, Thomas worked on internal security, investigating his own colleagues, watching careers destroyed by suspicion, seeing the paranoia that a single traitor could inject into an entire organization. He found himself assigned to Moscow Station in 1989, just as the Soviet Union began its slow collapse. Then Belfast during the height of the Troubles, where sectarian violence claimed lives with brutal regularity. Then the Middle East in 1995, where terrorism was evolving into something new and terrible. Each assignment hardened him. Each mission stripped away another piece of the person he'd been, replacing it with the professional he needed to become. Thomas Whitmore became the ghost, efficient, precise, emotionless. Until 1998. Until Operation Crimson Shadow. The mission was supposed to be simple: extract a Syrian scientist who'd been working on chemical weapons and wanted to defect. The scientist, Dr. Rashid Al-Mansour, had information about weapons proliferation that could prevent catastrophic attacks. Thomas led a 3-person team into Damascus, using cover identities as oil industry consultants. The extraction was planned for a Thursday evening, using a diplomatic vehicle to move Al-Mansour to the British Embassy. But when Thomas's team arrived at the safe house, they found a massacre. Al-Mansour was dead along with his entire family: wife, 2 daughters, elderly mother. Execution style. Professional. And waiting in the house was a message, written in blood on the wall in English: "The ghost is exposed. Crimson Shadow is compromised. Run." Thomas's team barely escaped Damascus alive, fighting their way through checkpoints and hostile territory to reach the Turkish border. They lost 1 team member, Sarah Mitchell, killed by a sniper as they crossed into Turkey. When Thomas returned to London, he found MI6 in chaos. The mole had struck again, feeding information about Operation Crimson Shadow to multiple hostile intelligence services. But this time, there was a new wrinkle. The investigation revealed that the mole wasn't just selling information. They'd been systematically compromising operations for 15 years, responsible for dozens of deaths, countless blown missions, and the exposure of entire agent networks. And the evidence, compiled from decades of careful analysis, pointed to someone Thomas knew well, someone he trusted, someone who'd been his mentor when he joined the service: Deputy Director James Pemberton. The revelation shattered Thomas's world. Pemberton had recruited him, trained him, shaped his entire career, and all along Pemberton had been feeding information to the highest bidder, sometimes the Russians, sometimes the Chinese, sometimes private interests that paid in offshore accounts. But Pemberton had powerful friends, connections that reached into the highest levels of British government. When MI6 moved to arrest him, Pemberton disappeared, taking with him files that documented 15 years of compromised operations. Thomas was assigned to hunt him down. A year-long chase across 3 continents, following breadcrumbs and ghosts, watching as Pemberton stayed 1 step ahead, protected by an unknown network. The pursuit ended in Hong Kong in late 1998, in an abandoned warehouse near the harbour. Thomas finally cornered Pemberton, weapon drawn, ready to end the chase. "You can't kill me, Thomas," Pemberton had said, his voice carrying the calm assurance of a man holding aces. "I've set up a dead man's switch. If anything happens to me, every operation, every agent, every source we've run for 20 years gets published on the internet. MI6 will be destroyed. Hundreds of people will die." Thomas stood in that warehouse for what felt like hours, but was really only minutes, his weapon trained on the man who'd betrayed everything they stood for. And then he made a choice that would haunt him forever. He lowered his weapon and let Pemberton walk away, taking with him the secrets that could destroy British intelligence, the evidence that could expose networks of agents around the world. Thomas returned to London and submitted a report that officially declared Pemberton dead, killed resisting capture. He buried the truth under false documentation, protected the service, and in doing so, became complicit in the greatest betrayal in MI6 history. Senior leadership understood what Thomas had done. They understood the impossible choice he'd made, and they understood that Thomas Whitmore could never be an active operative again, because he carried a secret that powerful people needed to remain buried. They offered him an extraction package, a new identity, relocation to the United States, a comfortable pension under a cover story. In exchange, Thomas would disappear completely, taking the truth about Pemberton with him into the shadows. Thomas accepted. He chose Seattle because it reminded him of London, grey, rainy, comfortable in its melancholy. He built a life from nothing, brick by brick, routine by routine, trying to become someone new while carrying the weight of who he'd been. For 25 years it worked. For 25 years Thomas Whitmore was a ghost who stayed buried. Until 5 teenagers in an alley forced him to reveal skills he'd kept dormant, until those skills attracted attention, until attention turned into investigation, until investigation threatened to uncover the one secret that governments on 3 continents needed to stay hidden. James Pemberton was still alive, still hiding, still holding the dead man's switch that could destroy lives with the press of a button. And the proof of this, documentation, evidence, the entire truth, was hidden beneath Thomas Whitmore's floorboards in Seattle, insurance against the day when the past came calling. That day had arrived. In his apartment, Thomas knelt beside his reading chair and carefully pried up 3 floorboards. Inside the hidden compartment were 4 waterproof containers, documents, flash drives, photographs, 25 years of insurance against betrayal. He heard footsteps in the hallway outside his door, too heavy for Margaret from downstairs, too purposeful for random residents. Thomas moved to the window, glancing down at the street below. 2 vehicles parked with clear sightlines to his building's exits, professional surveillance positions. They'd found him faster than he'd expected. He had minutes, maybe less, to make a decision that would affect not just his life, but the lives of everyone in his orbit. Emma Chen, Harold, Margaret, and yes, even those 5 teenagers who'd stumbled into something far beyond their understanding. The ghost had one more operation in him, one final mission: protect the innocent, expose the truth. And finally, after 25 years, face James Pemberton and end the game once and for all. Thomas gathered what he needed and moved toward the door, his body remembering movements trained decades ago, his mind calculating angles and probabilities with the cold precision of his former self. Thank you for staying with this story so far. The best is yet to come, I promise you. What we're building toward is a confrontation that will test everything Thomas has become and challenge everything he thought he'd left behind. The pieces are in motion now, and when they collide, Seattle will become the backdrop for a conclusion that spans decades of secrets, betrayal, and one man's quest for redemption. Emma Chen sat in her car outside Thomas Whitmore's apartment building, her hands gripping the steering wheel, her detective instincts screaming that she was in over her head. The classified file she'd glimpsed had disappeared from her system within minutes, but not before she'd managed to photograph it with her phone. Now that photograph felt like a bomb in her pocket. She'd called her lieutenant, preparing to brief him on what she'd discovered, but something stopped her. A feeling, an instinct, that if she brought this into official channels, Thomas Whitmore would disappear, or worse, she'd be pulled off the case by federal authorities with jurisdiction she couldn't challenge. So instead, she made a choice that went against every rule in her playbook. She decided to confront Thomas directly. Emma checked her service weapon out of habit, then walked into the building. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt longer than it should have, each floor a chance to reconsider, to turn back, to play this by the book. But Emma had joined the police force because she believed in truth, and something about Thomas Whitmore. The way he'd spared those teenagers when he could have destroyed them suggested a man worth understanding rather than fearing. She knocked on apartment 304. No answer. She knocked again, calling out, "Mr. Whitmore, this is Detective Emma Chen, Seattle PD. I need to speak with you about an incident in Ballard." The door opened, but not Thomas. Instead, a woman in her 40s with sharp features and colder eyes stood in the doorway, her hand positioned in a way Emma recognized instantly, ready to draw a concealed weapon. "Detective Chen, I'm afraid Mr. Whitmore is unavailable at the moment. Perhaps you could leave your contact information and he'll reach out when convenient." Emma's instincts flared. The woman's accent was British, cultured, precisely the kind of accent that came from expensive schools and government training. This wasn't a neighbor or a relative. "And you are?" "A concerned friend." "Now, if you'll excuse us—" "Actually, I won't." Emma positioned herself to prevent the door from closing, her hand moving toward her own weapon. "This is an active investigation, and I need to speak with Mr. Whitmore. Now." The tension in the hallway could have been cut with a knife. 2 women, both trained, both assessing threat levels, both understanding that whatever happened next would have consequences neither could fully predict. Then Thomas's voice called from inside the apartment, tired but firm. "It's all right, Victoria, let her in." Victoria stepped aside with obvious reluctance, revealing Thomas Whitmore sitting in his reading chair, looking somehow both older and more dangerous than Emma had observed during her surveillance. Detective Chen, please come in. I believe we have much to discuss. Thomas gestured to a chair opposite his own. Though I should warn you, once you sit down, once we have this conversation, your life will become considerably more complicated. Emma entered, her eyes scanning the apartment with trained observation. Neat, minimal, everything in its place. But there, near the reading chair, 3 floorboards slightly displaced, revealing a hidden compartment now empty. "Where are they?" Victoria demanded, noticing the same thing. "The files, Thomas, where are they?" "Somewhere safe. Somewhere even you won't find them." Thomas turned his pale blue eyes to Emma. "Detective, allow me to introduce Senior Intelligence Officer Victoria Ashford of MI6. She's come a very long way to clean up a mess that I'm afraid I've created." Emma's hand stayed near her weapon. "Someone want to tell me what's going on?" 25 years ago, Thomas began, his voice carrying the weight of buried history, "I made a choice to protect British intelligence by allowing a traitor to escape. In doing so, I became both keeper of secrets and threat to multiple governments. I came to Seattle to disappear, to be forgotten, to live out my remaining years in peace." "And then you revealed yourself to a group of teenagers," Victoria interjected, her tone carrying accusation. "Exposed skills that should have remained buried. Attracted attention we specifically designed your extraction to avoid." "They were children making a mistake," Thomas said firmly. "I wasn't going to hurt them." "But you couldn't just take the beating like a normal old man?" Victoria's frustration was palpable. "Now we have a detective investigating, a teenager hacking into classified archives, and worst of all—" Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression turned grave. "Pemberton knows. He knows you're exposed, and he's activated his contingency." The name hit the room like a physical force. Emma saw Thomas's hands tighten on the arms of his chair, saw something flicker across his features that might have been fear or might have been rage. "Who's Pemberton?" Emma demanded. "A ghost," Thomas said quietly. "A traitor, and the reason I can never truly be free." Across Seattle, in his basement apartment, Marcus Johnson had pushed his investigation too far. He'd been so focused on uncovering Thomas Whitmore's identity that he'd failed to notice the digital footprints he was leaving, the alarms he was triggering, the attention he was drawing from people who dealt with problems like Marcus with permanent solutions. His screens suddenly went black. Then, one by one, they flickered back to life, displaying a message that made his blood run cold. "Marcus Johnson, age 19, 4247 University Way, NE, apartment B12. You've been investigating Thomas Whitmore. You've accessed files you shouldn't know exist. You have 2 choices: stop immediately and delete everything, or face consequences you cannot imagine. You have 1 hour to decide." Crimson shadow. Marcus stared at the screens, his heart hammering. How did they know his address? How had they penetrated his security so easily? His phone rang. Unknown number. Against every instinct, Marcus answered. "Hello, Marcus." The voice was male, British, cultured, and terrifying in its calm certainty. "I've been watching your rather impressive digital investigation. You're quite talented for someone so young, which is why I'm going to give you an opportunity most don't receive, a chance to walk away." "Who are you?" "Let's say I'm someone who understands the power of information. Thomas Whitmore possesses certain files that belong to me. Files that, if released, would cause considerable inconvenience to my comfortable life. I need those files retrieved." "Why would I help you?" "Because if you don't, I'll start with your mother, Janet Johnson, nurse at Swedish Medical Center, Cherry Hill. Then your younger sister, Alicia, freshman at Roosevelt High School. Then your friends, Devon, Jake, Tyler, and Ethan. One by one, I'll demonstrate what happens to people who interfere with my interests." The line went dead. Marcus sat in stunned silence, his hands shaking. This was beyond hacking, beyond digital games, beyond anything in his experience. This was real. Lives were at stake, his family was threatened. He grabbed his jacket and ran from his apartment, heading to the only person he could think of, who might understand what they were all caught up in. Thomas Whitmore. Back in Thomas's apartment, Emma was trying to process information that reshaped her understanding of reality. "So let me get this straight," she said, her detective brain working to organize chaos into logic. "You're a former MI6 agent who let a traitor escape. That traitor, Pemberton, has files that could destroy British intelligence and expose agents worldwide. You have proof of his crimes hidden somewhere, and now he's coming to Seattle to retrieve that proof?" "Essentially, yes," Thomas confirmed. "And the teenagers who confronted you in the alley are now potential targets because they represent leverage against me. Pemberton will threaten anyone in my orbit to get what he wants." "This is insane," Emma muttered. "This is spy movie nonsense." "Unfortunately, Detective, this is very real." Victoria moved to the window, scanning the street below with practiced eyes. "And it's about to get considerably more dangerous. We have assets inbound to secure this situation, but Pemberton has resources we can't fully track. He's been off the grid for 25 years, building networks, making alliances with people who value information over loyalty." A knock at the door made everyone tense. Thomas stood, moving with the fluid readiness Emma had witnessed in the alley. "Expecting someone?" Victoria's hand moved to her weapon. "Actually, yes." Thomas opened the door to reveal Marcus Johnson, breathless, panicked, and carrying a laptop bag like a shield. "Mr. Whitmore, Marcus stopped, seeing the two women, understanding he'd walked into something far more complex than he'd imagined. "I need help. Someone threatened my family. They want files you have. They called themselves Crimson Shadow." Thomas closed his eyes for a brief moment, a man bearing the weight of consequences decades in the making. Then he opened them, and Emma saw the transformation, the old man disappearing, replaced by the operative who'd survived in the shadows of the Cold War. "How long ago was the call?" 10 minutes. "Then we don't have much time." Thomas turned to Victoria. "You need to activate protection protocols. Marcus's family, the other teenagers, anyone I've had regular contact with. Pemberton will use them all as pawns. I can't authorize that level of resource deployment without approval from London." "Then get approval." Thomas's voice carried command authority that made everyone in the room straighten. "Or I release everything. Every file, every operation, every dirty secret from the last 40 years. I'll burn it all down rather than let innocents die because of my choices." Victoria stared at him for a long moment, then pulled out her phone and made a call. Emma stepped closer to Thomas. "What aren't you telling me? Why is Pemberton making his move now after 25 years? Thomas looked at her with eyes that had seen too much, carried too many secrets. "Because he's dying, Detective. Cancer, based on intelligence Victoria's service has gathered. He has 6 months, maybe less. And dying men with nothing to lose are the most dangerous creatures on Earth. He wants those files destroyed before he dies, wants to ensure his secrets stay buried, his legacy protected." "What's in the files?" "Proof that he wasn't just a traitor to Britain. Proof that he facilitated terrorist attacks, assassinations, coups in developing nations, all for profit. Proof that would implicate current politicians, businessmen, intelligence chiefs across multiple countries. Pemberton didn't just betray his service, he betrayed humanity." Marcus sank into a chair, his face pale. "And I led him right to you by hacking those databases." "No, son." Thomas placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, the gesture surprisingly gentle from someone so dangerous. "I led him here by refusing to stay hidden, by choosing to protect you and your friends instead of running, by deciding that maybe, after 25 years of silence, it's time to end this once and for all." Victoria ended her call, her expression grim. "Protection teams are mobilizing. We have 12 agents coming in from Vancouver Station, another 8 from our San Francisco office. But it'll take 6 hours to get everyone in position. Can you hold out that long?" "I've held out for 25 years, Thomas said. 6 more hours won't kill me, though I can't promise the same for Pemberton's people if they make a move against those kids." Emma made a decision that would define her career. "I'm calling this in. Seattle PD needs to know—" "No," Thomas said firmly. "The moment you involve local police, you put more innocents at risk. Pemberton has connections. He might have assets in your department. The more people who know, the more danger everyone faces." "So what's your plan? We just wait here for a ghost from your past to attack?" Thomas smiled, and it was the smile of a predator planning his hunt. "No, Detective, we go on offense. We set a trap. And we end this the way it should have ended in Hong Kong 25 years ago." He moved to his bookshelf, pulling down a particular volume, not Le Carré this time, but something older, a collection of poetry by T.S. Eliot. Hidden inside the hollowed pages was a phone, more sophisticated than the flip model he used daily. "One call," Thomas said. "One message to Pemberton. An offer he can't refuse because his ego won't let him. I challenge him to finish this face-to-face. One final confrontation between the agent and the traitor." "That's suicide," Victoria protested. "No, that's the only way this ends without innocent people dying. Pemberton will come. He'll come because he needs to prove he's smarter, because he needs to win against the one person who got close to exposing him. And when he comes, we'll be ready." Emma looked at Thomas Whitmore, this 68-year-old man who'd lived 2 lives, who carried the weight of impossible choices, who was now preparing for one final mission. "You're going to need help," she heard herself say. "Official help, off the books. Someone who knows the city and can move resources without attracting attention." Thomas studied her for a long moment. "Detective, once you commit to this, there's no going back. Your career could end. Your life could end. Are you certain?" Emma thought about Devon Carter, walking into her office scared and confused. She thought about 5 teenagers who'd made a mistake and stumbled into a world of spies and shadows. She thought about what it meant to be a detective, not just enforcing law but protecting people. "I'm certain. Tell me what you need." Marcus stood as well, his fear transforming into determination. "I can help too. I got us into this by hacking those files. Let me help get us out." Victoria shook her head, but Thomas raised a hand to stop her protests. "Sometimes, Victoria, you have to trust unlikely allies. These people have chosen to stand in the line of fire. The least we can do is give them the tools to survive it." He looked at the 3 of them, a British intelligence officer bound by rules and protocols, an American detective risking everything for strangers, and a teenage hacker whose curiosity had opened Pandora's box. "All right then, we have 6 hours before Pemberton makes his move. 6 hours to turn Seattle into a trap. 6 hours to end a game that's been playing for 25 years. Thomas opened his laptop and pulled up a map of the city. "This is how we're going to win." The story is almost reaching its end, but stay until the finish to know the outcome of this incredible confrontation. If you're watching up to this point, it's because you're enjoying this story, so don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like so you won't miss the next exciting stories that are coming. The final battle is about to begin, and trust me when I say, everything you've seen so far has been just the setup for a conclusion that will test every skill Thomas Whitmore has spent a lifetime developing. The rain fell heavier now over Seattle, as if the city itself understood that something significant was about to unfold in its streets. Thomas Whitmore stood at the window of Harold Chen's architectural office in Pioneer Square, looking down at the historic brick buildings and cobblestone streets that would become his battlefield. The location was perfect: multiple entry and exit points, clear sightlines, civilian traffic minimal at night, and most importantly, surrounded by buildings Harold's firm had worked on, meaning access to security systems and architectural plans. "I still think this is madness," Victoria said, studying the tactical display on her laptop. Protection teams had secured the 5 teenagers and Marcus's family in safe houses, but securing them wasn't enough. Pemberton needed to be stopped permanently. "Madness is letting a dying traitor dictate terms," Thomas replied, his voice carrying the calm certainty of a man who'd made his peace with whatever came next. "We control the ground. We control the timing. We control the narrative." Emma coordinated with her most trusted officers, bringing in 4 detectives who'd proven their loyalty and discretion over the years. They positioned themselves in buildings surrounding Pioneer Square, creating a perimeter that looked casual but was strategically designed to channel Pemberton's approach. Marcus worked his technical magic, hacking into every camera system within 6 blocks, giving them eyes on every approach. His fingers flew across keyboards, transforming Seattle's digital infrastructure into an intelligence network that would have impressed MI6's cyber division. The message Thomas had sent to Pemberton was simple: "Pioneer Square, midnight. Bring the proof of your contingency system, and I'll trade the files documenting your crimes. We end this face-to-face, like professionals. Or are you too much of a coward now to face the man you trained?" Ghost. He'd known Pemberton couldn't resist, The traitor's ego, combined with his terminal diagnosis, would demand closure. One final confrontation to prove his superiority over the student who'd gotten too close to exposing him. At 11:30 p.m., Marcus's screens showed movement. 3 vehicles entering the area from different directions, professional spacing, clear coordination. "He brought a team," Victoria observed. "At least 8 operatives visible, probably more in reserve." "Expected," Thomas said. "Pemberton never took unnecessary risks, but he's also dying, which makes him unpredictable. He might want closure, but he'll also want insurance." "Mr. Whitmore." It was Harold Chen who'd insisted on staying despite the danger. "The building systems are ready. All electronic locks on my control, all security cameras feeding to Marcus, all fire suppression systems primed just as you requested." Thomas clasped his old chess partner's shoulder. "Thank you, my friend. Now please get to the safe location we discussed." 20 years of chess," Harold said quietly. 20 years of wondering who you really were. I'm glad I finally know, and I'm glad that who you were doesn't define who you've become." As Harold left, Thomas allowed himself a moment of reflection. For 25 years he'd built a life based on hiding, on being less than what he was, on choosing peace over purpose. But tonight he would embrace both. The man he'd been and the man he'd become would unite for one final purpose: protecting the innocent and facing the past without flinching. At 11:45, a single figure emerged from one of the vehicles. Tall, older now but still carrying himself with aristocratic bearing. James Pemberton hadn't just aged, he'd withered, the cancer eating away at him visible in his gaunt features and careful movements. But his eyes were still sharp, still calculating, still carrying the cold intelligence that had made him both brilliant operative and perfect traitor. Thomas stepped out of the building into the rain, walking slowly to the center of Pioneer Square. The streetlights cast pools of illumination through the downpour, creating a scene that looked pulled from a noir film. "Thomas," Pemberton called across the square, his cultured voice carrying despite the rain. "You look well. Age has been kinder to you than to me." "You made choices that age poorly, James. Body and soul tend to reflect that." Pemberton laughed, a sound carrying equal parts amusement and bitterness. "Philosophical to the end. That's what I always appreciated about you. Most operatives were thugs in nice suits, but you had depth. You asked questions. You cared about consequences. Which is why I couldn't let you destroy everything we'd worked for." "Destroy?" Pemberton took a step closer, his hands visible and empty. "I preserved it, Thomas. I kept British intelligence relevant by ensuring we always had leverage, always had information to trade, always had value. The world isn't black and white anymore. It never was. I simply accepted what you refused to see. You sold out agents. Good people died because of your greed. Good people die anyway. At least my actions served a purpose beyond the delusional patriotism that got so many killed for nothing." Thomas could see the other operatives now, 8 of them visible in the shadows around the square. Professional mercenaries, not intelligence officers. Pemberton's personal security, bought and paid for with blood money. "You said you'd trade the files," Pemberton continued. "I've brought proof of my dead man's switch, a tablet containing the release protocols. If my heart stops, if I don't input a code every 72 hours, everything goes public. Every agent, every source, every operation from the past 30 years. Thousands of people compromised, British intelligence destroyed. Are your principles worth that many lives?" Thomas reached into his coat slowly, pulling out a USB drive. "The files. Everything I've collected over 25 years. Proof of every crime, every transaction, every betrayal. Your entire legacy, documented in meticulous detail. And you'll just hand it over, after all this time?" "On one condition: you release the teenagers you threatened, you leave Seattle. You die somewhere else with whatever peace you can find, but you leave these people alone." Pemberton smiled, and Thomas saw madness there. The madness of a dying man with nothing left to lose. "You always were too soft, Thomas, too concerned with innocence. It's what made you a good operative but a poor strategist. You never understood the real game. Which is why you're going to lose tonight." The words hung in the rain-soaked air for a heartbeat. Then Pemberton's expression shifted from confidence to suspicion. "What have you done?" "I've learned from the best." Thomas's voice carried a hint of satisfaction. "You taught me that the greatest operations are ones where the target thinks they're in control right up until they realize they never were." Marcus's voice came through Thomas's concealed earpiece. "Got him. The tablet signal is transmitting. Tracing the server location now." Pemberton's hand moved toward his pocket, but Emma and her team emerged from the buildings, weapons drawn, professional and coordinated. "Seattle police, everyone on the ground now!" The mercenaries around the square hesitated. They were professionals, but professionals valued survival over loyalty, especially when facing law enforcement who'd clearly been expecting them. "James Pemberton," Emma announced, her voice carrying official authority, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, extortion, and threatening the safety of Seattle residents. You have the right to remain silent." "This is sovereign British intelligence business," Pemberton shouted, his composure finally cracking. "You have no jurisdiction." "Actually," Victoria stepped forward, and Thomas noticed she wasn't alone. 6 more MI6 officers emerged, having arrived during the last hour without announcing their presence. "He's also under arrest for treason against the United Kingdom, murder of British intelligence officers, and about 30 other charges that will ensure he dies in a cell rather than in comfort." Pemberton looked around wildly, his perfect plan collapsing. "The dead man's switch. If you arrest me, everything still goes public." "About that," Marcus's voice came through speakers now, his teenage enthusiasm unable to hide his pride. "Funny thing about dead man switches, they require functional servers. And funny thing about servers, they're really vulnerable to someone who knows what they're doing. Your contingency. I've got it copied and encrypted in 17 different locations, and I've deleted your release protocols. The information still exists, but you don't control it anymore. We do." Thomas walked closer to Pemberton, close enough to see the desperation and rage in the dying man's eyes. "You taught me everything, James. How to gather intelligence, how to build networks, how to create contingencies. But you forgot one critical lesson, the one that distinguished us from the people we fought against." "What lesson?" "That loyalty to people matters more than loyalty to self. You built your empire alone, trusting no one, believing you were smarter than everyone. I built a community here in Seattle, friends, allies, people who chose to stand with me, not because I paid them or threatened them, but because they believed it was right." Thomas gestured to the scene around them. Emma and her detectives, Victoria and her MI6 team, Marcus and his technical wizardry, even Harold watching from a safe distance. "That's the difference between us, James. You died alone years ago. You just didn't realize it until tonight." Pemberton was handcuffed, his mercenaries disarmed, his empire of secrets collapsing in real time. As Victoria's team led him away, he stopped beside Thomas one final time. "You still let me walk away in Hong Kong. That choice is why we're here tonight. You could have ended this then." "I could have," Thomas agreed, "but then I would have become what you are. And I've learned over 25 years in Seattle that who we choose to be matters more than what we're capable of doing." Philosophical fool to the end. Perhaps, but I'm a fool who gets to go home tonight, to friends, to a life that means something beyond ledgers and secrets. You're going to die in a cell, James, alone, forgotten. That's the price you paid for your choices. As the police vehicles drove away with Pemberton, the rain began to lighten. Dawn was still hours away, but Thomas felt something shift inside him, a weight he'd carried for 2.5 decades finally lifting. Emma approached, holstering her weapon. "We'll need a statement, probably several statements. This is going to be a paperwork nightmare." "I understand, though I suspect Victoria will be negotiating jurisdiction issues with your superiors shortly." "Already started," Victoria confirmed, joining them. "This will be classified at the highest levels. Pemberton will be tried in secret, his crimes acknowledged internally but never made public. The official story will be much more mundane." "And the teenagers?" Thomas asked. "Safe, confused, and they'll probably have questions you'll need to answer." Thomas smiled, a genuine expression that felt foreign after so many years of careful control. "I suppose I owe them that much. They started this entire cascade by trying to intimidate an old man in an alley. The next morning, Thomas sat in Harold's office with 5 nervous teenagers who'd expected many things from their lives, but never to be at the center of an international espionage crisis. Marcus spoke first, his usual confidence subdued by everything he'd witnessed. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm sorry, I got curious, started digging, and almost got people killed." "Curiosity isn't a crime, Marcus, though perhaps be more careful where you dig in the future." Thomas looked at each of them in turn, Marcus, Devon, Jake, Tyler, and Ethan. "You all made a mistake in that alley. You thought you could intimidate someone weak, take power from someone powerless, but you learned something important that day." "That you could have destroyed us?" Devon asked quietly. "That you can never truly judge people by appearances. That everyone carries stories you don't know. That respect shouldn't be given based on fear, but based on understanding that every person you meet has lived a life as complex as your own." "Why didn't you hurt us?" Ethan asked. "You had every right to defend yourself." "Because you're children who made a mistake, and I spent too many years in a world where mistakes were punished with death. I didn't want to be that person anymore. I wanted to be someone who broke cycles instead of perpetuating them." Marcus pulled out his laptop, hesitating before speaking. "There's something else. When I was tracing Pemberton's network, I found records, scholarships he'd blocked, opportunities he'd destroyed, all to maintain leverage over people. There were 6 scholarship applications from Seattle students that he'd flagged to be denied because they were connected to you through community programs you supported." Thomas felt his heart clench. Even in hiding, even trying to do good, Pemberton had found ways to hurt people. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I can unflag them. I can make sure those 6 students get the opportunities they deserve, and maybe—" Marcus looked at the other 4 teenagers. "Maybe we can use what we learned from all this to actually help people instead of intimidating them." Over the following weeks, Seattle returned to its rhythms. The official story was mundane. A British national arrested for financial crimes, details classified for ongoing investigations. The teenagers weren't mentioned. Thomas Whitmore remained anonymous, but things had changed. Marcus started a community technology center in the university district, teaching disadvantaged kids coding and digital skills. Devon began mentoring younger students about making better choices than he had. The other 3 found their own paths toward redemption. Emma received a commendation for her work, though the details remained classified. She also received an occasional consultation request from Victoria's office. Apparently, Seattle PD had impressed British intelligence with its professionalism. Thomas continued his routines, but they felt different now. He wasn't hiding anymore, he was choosing the bookstore not because it was safe, but because he genuinely enjoyed Margaret's recommendations. Choosing chess with Harold not as cover, but as genuine friendship. Choosing his quiet life not out of fear, but out of preference. One Friday evening, 3 months after Pemberton's arrest, Thomas sat at his usual table at the Walrus and the Carpenter. But tonight, he wasn't alone. Emma joined him, off-duty and curious to learn more about the man behind the legend. Marcus brought his laptop, excitedly showing Thomas the technology center's progress. Harold brought his chess set, ready for their regular game. "Is this what normal feels like?" Thomas asked, looking around the table at these unlikely friends. "I don't know about normal," Emma replied with a smile, "but it feels right." And for the first time in over 40 years, Thomas Whitmore, former MI6 operative, keeper of dangerous secrets, ghost who'd lived in the shadows, felt something he'd long ago stopped believing was possible. He felt home. The rain fell gently outside, Seattle continuing its eternal rhythm. Somewhere across the Atlantic, James Pemberton sat in a secure facility, his empire of secrets destroyed, his legacy reduced to classified warnings about the price of betrayal. The files Thomas had protected for 25 years were now secured by MI6, with copies held by oversight committees that would ensure they were never misused. But more importantly, 5 teenagers who'd made a mistake learned that redemption was possible. A detective learned that doing right sometimes meant breaking rules. A British intelligence officer learned that Americans could be trusted allies. And an old man learned that ghosts could become real people again if they chose to. The past would always be part of Thomas Whitmore. The skills would always remain, muscle memory that never truly faded. The experiences would always inform his perspective, but they didn't define him anymore. He'd started his journey in British intelligence believing in country and duty. He'd ended it understanding that loyalty to people, to community, to the choice to protect rather than harm, mattered more than any flag or institution. The ghost had become real. The operative had become human. The man who'd lived in shadows had found his way to light. And in a rainy city in the Pacific Northwest, in a neighborhood of brick buildings and quiet streets, Thomas Whitmore finally found what he'd been searching for without knowing it. Not safety, not anonymity, but belonging. The game was over. The ghosts were laid to rest, and the man who'd been known by a dozen names in a dozen cities could finally, truly, be Thomas Whitmore. Just an old man who liked books, chess, good food, and genuine friends. Just a man who'd learned that the greatest victory wasn't surviving the battle, but choosing to live with honor once the fighting was done. Just a man, finally at peace. And so ends the extraordinary journey of Thomas Whitmore, a man who discovered that true courage isn't about hiding who we are, but about choosing when to reveal that truth, and more importantly, choosing what we do with the power that truth carries. This story asks us to reflect. How many anonymous heroes walk among us? How many people carry pasts we'll never know? And most importantly, do you believe that extreme experiences define us forever? Or can we truly start over? Leave your opinion in the comments. Tell us, would you have acted like Thomas, like the teenagers, or like Detective Emma? Share your name and which city and state you're watching from. We love hearing from our community around the world. If this story touched your heart or made you rethink your own experiences, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next narratives that explore the limits of human nature. And attention, on the screen now is our next recommendation, an equally impactful story that you won't want to miss. Click and continue this journey with us.